The pregnancy test glowed positive in my trembling hands, months of hoping finally rewarded with the miracle coal and I had prayed for every night. I pressed the plastic stick to my chest, tears of pure joy streaming down my face as I imagined his reaction. 5 years of marriage and finally we were going to have the baby that would complete our perfect life. I raced up the stairs 2 at a time, my heart hammering with excitement as I planned the surprise, maybe cooking his favorite dinner first, or maybe just bursting through the door with the news because I couldn't contain this happiness another second. The bedroom door was cracked open, soft moans drifting through the gap like poison arrows aimed directly at my soul. My feet moved without permission, carrying me forward even as my mind screamed warnings I couldn't process. Through the opening I saw them, Cole's powerful frame moving above Ashley's body. The pregnancy test slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor as my entire world cracked apart. "Brittany," he said calmly, not even pulling away from her. "Perfect timing. I was wondering when you'd find out." The pack trial was a mockery of justice, Ashley's tearful testimony about my supposed affair with Frederick poisoning every mind in the room. Photos that couldn't be real, messages I'd never sent, evidence planted so perfectly that even my own family turned away when I begged them to believe me. The stress triggered contractions that doubled me over with agony, blood seeping through my dress as our baby fought to survive in a world that had already rejected us both. Behind me, the pack that had been my entire world closed ranks, erasing me as if I'd never existed. But somewhere in the wasteland of my shattered heart, a tiny spark refused to die, the promise that someday, someone would need the love I had no one left to give. I stopped being normal the day Connor Vale branded me unfaithful in front of the entire pack, when Ashley's lies cost me everything including the child I'd carried for 7 months. 3 months of wandering the forgotten territories as a scavenger have taught me that death's perfume often leads to opportunity, and I desperately need whatever supplies I can salvage from abandoned settlements before winter claims these mountains completely. My boots crunch through brittle leaves as I approach what used to be a royal convoy, the ornate carriages now nothing but splintered wood and twisted metal scattered across the forest floor like broken toys. Bodies lie everywhere, their wounds too precise, too calculated to be the work of rogues hunting for sport. This was an execution, not a battle, and the magical residue clinging to shattered trees tells me powerful wolves orchestrated this slaughter with surgical efficiency. The air itself feels poisoned, thick with the lingering echoes of dark magic that makes my skin crawl even though I lack the supernatural senses that would make a true wolf recoil in horror. I should be running from whatever force could destroy an entire royal guard, but hunger makes cowards of us all, and my empty stomach overrules my survival instincts as I pick through the wreckage for anything useful. Gold coins scattered like fallen leaves catch my attention first, followed by a leather pouch containing dried meat that could sustain me for days. The irony isn't lost on me that I've become the very thing my former pack despised, a scavenger picking through the bones of others' misfortune. But survival has a way of stripping away pride along with everything else you thought defined you. That's when I hear it, a sound so unexpected in this graveyard that I freeze mid-step, my hands suspended over a promising leather pouch. A baby's cry, thin and desperate, echoing from beneath an overturned carriage like a ghost demanding attention. Every instinct screams at me to leave, that this is obviously a trap designed to lure rescuers into whatever fate claimed these royal guards, but the sound pierces straight through the numbness I've carefully cultivated since losing my own child. My feet move without permission, carrying me toward the crying despite my mind's frantic protests, because something about that particular note of distress awakens maternal instincts I thought died in that sterile pack hospital room where they told me my baby's heart had stopped beating. The memory of empty arms and silent nurseries crashes over me as I drop to my knees beside the carriage, ignoring the way broken glass bites through my torn leggings, and peer into the shadowy space beneath twisted metal. A baby boy, maybe 6 months old, lies wrapped in silk blankets embroidered with silver threads that catch what little sunlight filters through the forest canopy. His eyes are the most extraordinary pale blue I've ever seen, almost silver in their intensity, and they track my movement with an awareness no infant should possess. Royal bloodline, without question, which means keeping him alive will paint an enormous target on my back. But as I reach for him, those otherworldly eyes meet mine and something fundamental shifts in my chest. His tiny fist wraps around my finger with surprising strength, and suddenly the hollow ache that's lived behind my ribs since losing my own baby eases just slightly, as if this unexpected child brings some small measure of healing to wounds I thought would never close. "Hello, little prince," I whisper, lifting him carefully from his shelter, noting how his crying stops the moment I cradle him against my chest. The silver embroidery on his blankets depicts phases of the moon, and something about the pattern tickles my memory, some half-remembered legend about royal children born under specific lunar alignments. His scent is pure innocence cut with something else, something that makes my damaged senses sing with recognition despite never having encountered anything like it before. Power. This child radiates magical potential like heat from a forge, and suddenly I understand why someone wanted him dead. The weight of him in my arms feels impossibly right, as if some cosmic force has delivered exactly what my broken heart needed most, even as my logical mind catalogs all the reasons this is a catastrophic mistake. I'm still staring into those impossible eyes when the sound of approaching horses thunders through the forest, getting closer by the second, and I realize with crystal clarity that whoever orchestrated this massacre is returning to ensure no witnesses survived. Panic floods my system as I clutch the baby closer, my mind racing through escape routes while my body remains frozen in indecision. The smart choice would be to leave him here and run, to preserve my own miserable existence rather than risk everything for a stranger's child, but my arms refuse to release him even as hoofbeats grow louder. Something about this moment feels predestined, as if every terrible thing that's happened to me was merely preparation for this exact decision. 3 months of surviving alone have taught me to trust my instincts above all else, and every instinct I possess is screaming that this child's fate is somehow intertwined with my own. Alexander, as I've decided to call him after the silver embroidery spelling out his name on his blankets, has been remarkably calm during our 3-day journey through unmarked territory, almost as if he understands the necessity of our flight from whatever hunters destroyed his convoy. His extraordinary eyes track every movement I make with an intelligence that unsettles me, and more than once I've caught myself talking to him as if he were an adult rather than an infant who should barely be able to focus on faces. The villagers emerge from their homes as we approach, drawn by curiosity and the unmistakable scent of desperation that clings to refugees, but their expressions shift from wariness to wonder the moment they lay eyes on Alexander. "Sweet Mother Moon," whispers an elderly woman with silver hair braided down her back, crossing herself in the old way as she stares at the child in my arms. Those eyes haven't seen the like since the old stories. I pull Alexander closer instinctively, my body positioning itself between him and their scrutiny even though these people show no signs of hostility, because 3 months of running has taught me that safety is always temporary and trust a luxury I can't afford. The woman notices my defensive posture and smiles gently, her weathered hands spreading wide in a gesture of peace that somehow eases the tension knotted between my shoulder blades. "I'm Helen," she says, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "The village healer, and you look like you could use both food and rest, child." The word child would have stung once, back when I was Luna of the Whispering Pines pack and commanded respect through my mating bond with Connor, but now it feels oddly comforting, like being wrapped in a blanket I'd forgotten I was missing. Helen leads us to a cottage that smells of dried herbs and wood smoke, the interior warm and welcoming in a way that makes my chest ache with longing for things I thought I'd successfully buried. "Sit," she commands, bustling around her kitchen with practiced efficiency while I settle onto a worn but comfortable chair near the fire. Alexander immediately begins to fuss in my arms, his tiny face scrunching with distress that sends panic shooting through me because keeping him quiet has been essential to our survival these past few days. "He's hungry," Helen observes, returning with a bowl of warm goat's milk and a cloth for feeding. "But there's something else, isn't there?" Her knowing eyes study my face with uncomfortable intensity, and I find myself nodding before I can think better of it. "He doesn't like being away from me," I admit, the words tumbling out despite my usual caution about revealing weaknesses. "If I leave him with others, even for a few minutes, he becomes inconsolable until I return." Helen's eyebrows rise with interest rather than skepticism, and she settles into the chair across from me with the careful movements of someone whose joints ache with old injuries. "Bond sick," she murmurs, more to herself than to me. "Haven't seen that in decades, not since the old bloodlines were stronger." Something cold slides down my spine at her words because I've heard whispers of magical bonds that form between guardians and those they're meant to protect, ancient connections that transcend normal pack dynamics and create ties that can't be severed by distance or time. "What do you mean?" I ask, though part of me already suspects the answer will change everything about how I understand my connection to this extraordinary child. Helen studies Alexander with eyes that seem to see far more than they should, her expression growing more solemn by the moment. "Some children are born with gifts that require specific guardians," she explains carefully, as if weighing each word for its potential impact. "The magic chooses who can safely channel their power, and once that bond forms..." She trails off, but her meaning is clear enough to make my stomach clench with the implications. "Once it forms, separation causes distress to both parties," I finish, remembering how empty and restless I felt during the brief periods when necessity forced me to leave Alexander hidden while I scouted for danger. Helen nods approvingly, as if I've passed some kind of test, and leans forward to examine Alexander more closely. "May I?" she asks, extending her hands toward him. I hesitate for a moment before transferring him to her arms, immediately feeling that familiar hollow ache as soon as he's no longer touching me. Helen's eyes widen as she cradles him, her weathered features softening with something approaching reverence. "Blessed child," she breathes, and Alexander responds by reaching up to grasp her finger with surprising strength. The old stories speak of such gifts, but I never thought to see one myself. As she speaks, Alexander begins to glow with the faintest shimmer of silver light, so subtle I might have imagined it if not for Helen's sharp intake of breath and the sudden tingling sensation that runs up my arms despite no longer holding him. The light seems to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, growing slightly brighter when his gaze finds mine across the short distance between us, and I realize with stunning clarity that whatever bond exists between us is far more profound than simple attachment. "He trusts you completely," Helen observes, her voice filled with wonder as she carefully returns Alexander to my arms. The moment he settles against my chest, the hollow ache disappears and something warm and right spreads through my entire being, as if pieces of myself I didn't know were missing have suddenly clicked back into place. The scream tears through Thornbrook's morning stillness like a blade through silk, jolting me from uneasy sleep into a world transformed by violence and terror. Alexander immediately begins crying in response to my spike of fear, his tiny fists flailing as the acrid smell of smoke and blood reaches us through Helen's cottage windows. "Raiders," Helen breathes, her weathered face going ashen as she peers through the curtains at the chaos erupting in the village square. "Connor Vale's hunters." My blood turns to ice at the familiar name because Connor's scent carries on the mountain wind, that distinctive blend of cedar and cruelty that once made my heart race with love but now triggers nothing but revulsion and rage. He's found us somehow, tracked Alexander and me to this sanctuary I'd foolishly believed might offer permanent safety, and the knowledge that my past has followed me here to endanger innocent people makes my chest burn with shame and fury. "We have to run," I whisper, clutching Alexander closer as his cries intensify, but Helen shakes her graying head with grim determination. "Too late for that, child," she says, moving with surprising speed to gather herbs and weapons from hidden caches around her cottage. They've surrounded the village, and Connor Vale doesn't leave witnesses. Through the window, I watch in horror as Connor himself strides through the morning shadows, his powerful frame moving with predatory grace between burning cottages where families cower in terror. He's larger than I remember, more dangerous, his dark hair longer and his features hardened by months of hunting and killing, but those cold green eyes remain exactly the same as they scan the village for signs of his quarry. Behind him march at least a dozen hunters, their movements coordinated and ruthless as they systematically search each building, dragging terrified villagers into the square for interrogation. He knows Alexander is here, I realize aloud, watching Connor's nostrils flare as he tests the air for familiar scents. But how? Helen's expression grows even more grim as she presses a leather pouch of protective herbs into my hands. "Doesn't matter now," she says simply. "What matters is keeping that child alive long enough for help to arrive." Her meaning hits me like a physical blow because she's planning to sacrifice herself to buy us time. This kind woman who took us in without question, preparing to die for strangers because she understands Alexander's importance even if she doesn't fully comprehend his nature. "No," I say firmly, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "I won't let you face them alone." Helen studies my face for a long moment before nodding once, as if she sees something there that satisfies her. "Then we make our stand together," she says, pressing an ancient blade into my free hand while keeping Alexander secure against my chest. "But promise me, if the worst happens, you'll take that child and run." The cottage door explodes inward before I can respond, splintering wood and iron flying in all directions as two of Connor's hunters force their way inside with drawn weapons. The first one, a scarred brute I don't recognize, barely has time to register our presence before Helen's blade finds his throat in a spray of crimson that paints the morning light with violence. The second hunter roars with rage and lunges toward me, but something primal awakens in my chest, some long-dormant instinct that has nothing to do with my missing wolf and everything to do with protecting the child in my arms. I move without thinking, Helen's blade sliding between his ribs with shocking ease, and suddenly there's blood on my hands and death in the air. But Alexander has stopped crying and those otherworldly eyes are watching me with something that might be approval. "Well done," Helen breathes, but her relief is short-lived because Connor's voice carries through the shattered doorway, closer now and filled with dark amusement. "Brittany," he calls, using the name I haven't heard spoken aloud in months. "I can smell you in there, along with something else, something that doesn't quite belong." His footsteps crunch through broken glass and splintered wood as he approaches the cottage entrance, taking his time because he knows we're trapped. "Bring me the child, and I might let the old woman live long enough to watch you die." Helen positions herself between the doorway and me, her blade steady despite the blood soaking her sleeve from a wound I hadn't noticed. "There's a back way," she whispers urgently. "Through the herb garden to the forest path." But even as she speaks, shadows move past the rear windows, Connor's hunters systematically closing off every escape route with military precision. He's not just here for Alexander, I realize with sudden clarity. He's here for revenge. Connor's laughter drifts through the cottage like poison as my words reach his enhanced hearing. "Smart girl," he says approvingly. "Though not smart enough to stay hidden." He appears in the doorway then, filling the frame with his imposing presence, and my breath catches because he's changed in ways that go beyond the physical. There's something darker about him now, something that makes Alexander whimper against my chest and Helen's blade tremble in her grip. Vincent sends his regards. Connor continues conversationally, stepping over the bodies of his fallen hunters without a glance. He's very interested in meeting the child you've been protecting. The name Vincent hits me like a lightning bolt because I've heard whispers of Mason Cross's brother, stories of ambition and betrayal that make even hardened rogues speak in hushed tones. You're working for Vincent, I breathe, the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. Alexander is Mason's son. Connor's smile turns predatory at my understanding. The lost prince, he confirms. Vincent has been searching for months, and imagine his delight when I told him about my faithless mate and her mysterious new charge. Alexander begins to glow in my arms, that subtle silver shimmer becoming more pronounced as Connor's presence agitates whatever power sleeps within his tiny frame, and I realize with growing dread that we're out of time and options.
3 months of searching for my missing son, following cold trails and false leads across territories where no sane wolf would venture, only to have fate deliver exactly what I've been hunting for in the most unexpected way possible. My hunter spread through the woods behind me as I tracked the scent toward what appears to be a fierce confrontation ahead, the acrid smell of smoke and blood mixing with that intoxicating fragrance that pulls at something deep in my chest. The woman appears before me like something from a fever dream, her dark hair whipping around her face as she clutches the silver-eyed child to her chest while facing down Connor Vale with nothing but a blade and raw determination. My wolf recognizes my son immediately, those unmistakable pale eyes that mark him as royal blood, but it's the woman protecting him that stops my breath completely. She's not particularly tall or imposing, this guardian who holds my heir, but there's something about the way she moves, the protective stance she takes against impossible odds, that makes every instinct I possess roar with recognition and possession. Mine. My wolf snarls beneath my skin, the word echoing through my consciousness with shocking intensity because I've never felt anything like this. Not even with Lydia, whose death 2 years ago left me convinced I'd never experience desire again. The woman's scent grows stronger as I approach through the trees, and suddenly I understand why my chest feels like it might explode from the pressure building there, why every cell in my body is screaming at me to claim her, protect her, make her mine in every way possible. Mate. The word crashes through me with devastating clarity, just as Connor raises his weapon toward her, and something primal and lethal erupts from my throat in a roar that shakes leaves from nearby branches. Stand down, I command, my alpha voice carrying absolute authority as I step into the clearing where this impossible scene unfolds before me. Connor freezes mid-strike, his green eyes widening with shock as he recognizes my presence, while the woman spins toward me with those extraordinary amber eyes that seem to see straight through to my soul. Mason, Connor breathes, his weapon lowering slightly as confusion replaces aggression on his scarred features. What are you doing here? But I'm not looking at him anymore because my entire focus has narrowed to the woman holding my son, this fierce guardian whose scent is driving my wolf to the edge of madness with need and recognition. She studies me with wary intelligence, her grip tightening protectively around Alexander as she assesses whether I represent salvation or just another threat to the child she's clearly willing to die protecting. You're his father, she says quietly, and her voice sends shivers down my spine with its husky tone. Alexander's father. The sound of my son's name on her lips does something dangerous to my self-control, makes me want to close the distance between us and bury my face in her throat, where that intoxicating scent is strongest. Yes, I manage, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the chaos raging through my system. I am. Connor's face contorts with rage and betrayal as understanding dawns. This isn't possible, he snarls. Vincent said you were in the Northern Territories, that you'd never find the boy. His admission confirms what I'd suspected about my brother's involvement in Alexander's disappearance, but that revelation feels secondary to the woman who's watching me with those incredible eyes, measuring my worthiness to claim what she's protected. Vincent was wrong about many things, I reply without taking my gaze from her face, including trusting you with something this important. The woman shifts slightly, and I catch a fuller hit of her scent, nearly staggering under the impact of pure want that crashes through me. She smells like home and safety, and everything I didn't know I was missing, like the missing piece of my soul finally returning where it belongs. What's your name? I ask her, needing to hear her voice again, to have something to call this miracle who's been protecting my heir. Brittany, she answers, her chin lifting with defiance that makes my wolf purr with approval. Brittany Brooks. The name fits her perfectly, strong and unpretentious like the woman herself, and I find myself repeating it silently, tasting how it feels in my mind. Brittany, I say aloud, watching how her pupils dilate slightly when I speak her name. Thank you for protecting my son. She nods once, her attention split between me and Connor, who's been growing more agitated by the moment. He's special, she says simply. I couldn't let them hurt him. The fierce protectiveness in her voice makes something warm and grateful spread through my chest, because she's risked everything for a child who isn't even hers. I know, I tell her, taking a careful step closer. I can sense what he is, what he'll become. Her eyes widen with surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to understand Alexander's nature. You can feel it too, she breathes. The power. I nod, unable to look away from her face, as the mate bond I'd thought was impossible blazes to life between us. Just like I can feel what you are, I say softly, watching recognition dawn in those beautiful amber eyes.
Mason's mountain fortress rises before us like something carved from the very bones of the earth, its towering walls of black stone gleaming with veins of silver that catch the moonlight and throw it back in patterns that seem almost alive. The journey here took 3 days through treacherous mountain passes, Alexander sleeping peacefully in my arms despite the harsh conditions, as if he somehow understands that we're finally moving towards safety rather than running from danger. Kane, Mason's second-in-command, leads us through corridors that speak of ancient power and carefully maintained secrets, past tapestries depicting wolves beneath silver moons and chambers filled with the soft glow of magical artifacts I can't begin to understand. The Alpha King's private wing, Kane announces as he stops before massive oak doors carved with lunar phases, and something about the formal way he addresses Mason makes my stomach flutter with nervous awareness. Inside, the chambers are both impressive and surprisingly warm, filled with leather-bound books and comfortable furniture that suggests this is a place for thinking rather than just commanding, and the scent of pine and cedar that belongs uniquely to Mason wraps around me like an embrace I'm not ready to acknowledge. Alexander stirs in my arms as we settle near the fireplace, his silver eyes focusing on Mason with that uncanny intelligence that never fails to unsettle me, and I watch in fascination as Mason's harsh features soften completely when he looks at his son. He knows you, I observe quietly, noting how Alexander reaches toward his father with tiny grasping fingers that seem to seek connection rather than simply attention. He remembers your scent from before he was taken. Mason extends one large finger for Alexander to grasp, and the sight of those powerful hands being so gentle sends warmth spiraling through my chest in ways I'm not prepared to examine. Blood calls to blood, Mason says simply, but his voice carries undertones of emotion that make me think there's more to his recognition of Alexander than simple paternal instinct. But it's more than that, isn't it? I press, because something about the way both father and son seem to glow faintly in each other's presence suggests supernatural connections beyond the normal bonds of family. Mason's eyes meet mine across Alexander's small form, and the intensity in that silver gaze makes my breath catch because he's looking at me like I'm something precious and rare rather than a broken Omega who barely escaped her own pack's justice. There are things you need to understand, he says carefully, rising to retrieve an ancient leather tome from a shelf that clearly holds his most valued possessions. About Alexander, about yourself, about why fate brought you together. The book he places between us is bound in leather so old it's nearly black, its pages yellow with age and covered in symbols that seem to shift and change when I'm not looking directly at them. This chronicles the prophecies of my line, Mason explains, settling beside me close enough that I can feel the heat radiating from his body. Prophecies spoken by my mate Lydia before her death. The mention of his dead mate sends an unexpected pang through my chest, a jealousy I have no right to feel toward a woman who gave birth to Alexander and died protecting him. She saw things, Mason continues, his voice growing distant with memory. Visions of what was to come, including the birth of a child who would heal the fractures in our world. He turns to a page depicting a silver-eyed infant surrounded by light, and my breath catches because the resemblance to Alexander is unmistakable. The healing king, I whisper, remembering Helen's words about children born with extraordinary gifts. But that's not all she saw, Mason says, turning another page to reveal an illustration that makes my heart stop completely. It shows a woman with dark hair and amber eyes, her hands outstretched toward a vessel that appears empty but glows with inner light. She saw his guardian, Mason says quietly, his gaze finding mine. A broken Omega who would become the moon vessel, the only one capable of channeling and containing his power safely. The page trembles in my hands as I stare at the face that could be my own, drawn centuries before I was born. This isn't possible, I breathe, but even as I say it, I remember the strange sensations I've felt around Alexander, the way his power seems to flow through me rather than overwhelming me. Lydia called her the empty vessel, Mason continues, his voice gentle but implacable. One who appeared broken to those who couldn't see her true purpose, cast out by those too blind to recognize what she truly was. Tears sting my eyes because he's describing my entire life, the rejection and exile that brought me to that forest clearing where I found Alexander. She saw you, Brittany, Mason says, reaching out to cover my hand with his. Saw your exile, your pain, even your name. She knew you would find Alexander when he needed you most, that you would protect him until I could find you both. The touch of his hand against mine sends electricity racing up my arm, and suddenly I understand that the pull I've felt toward him isn't just attraction but recognition, as if some part of my soul has been waiting for this moment. The mate bond, I whisper, finally putting words to the connection that's been building between us since that first moment in the forest. Mason nods, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my skin. Lydia saw that too, he admits. Saw that the moon vessel would be bound not just to the healing king but to his father, creating a triad of power strong enough to heal what was broken. Alexander coos softly in my lap, his tiny hand reaching up to touch both our faces, and suddenly I feel it, the power flowing between the three of us like a circuit finally completed, warm and right and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. The dining hall falls silent the moment I enter with Alexander in my arms, dozens of pairs of eyes tracking my movement as I make my way toward the table where Mason has saved me a seat beside him. The scent of roasted meat and fresh bread fills the air, but underneath it I detect the sharper notes of resentment and hostility that have become my constant companions since arriving at the fortress 3 weeks ago. "Look what the Alpha dragged in," comes a whisper from somewhere behind me, just loud enough to ensure I hear every word. "Playing house with a defective Omega and a bastard pup." My steps falter for just a moment before I force myself to continue forward, keeping my chin raised despite the way their collective disapproval weighs on my shoulders like a physical burden. Alexander coos softly against my chest, his tiny hand fisting in the fabric of my dress, and his innocent trust gives me the strength to reach Mason's side without completely breaking down. "Ignore them," Mason murmurs as I settle into the chair beside him, his voice pitched low enough that only I can hear. "They'll come around once they understand what you truly are." But I can see the tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles whiten as he grips his goblet, and I know their disrespect affects him more than he's willing to admit. A woman with striking red hair and emerald eyes approaches our table with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command, her expensive silk gown and elaborate jewelry marking her as high-ranking pack nobility. "Alpha King," she says, offering Mason a curtsy that's perfectly executed yet somehow manages to convey mockery rather than respect. "I don't believe I've been properly introduced to your guest." The pause before the word guest is deliberate, designed to emphasize my temporary and unwelcome status, and I feel heat rise in my cheeks at the obvious slight. "Brittany, this is Lady Vivian Ashford," Mason says evenly, though I catch the warning note in his voice. "Vivian, this is Brittany Brooks, Alexander's guardian and my honored companion." Vivian's green eyes rake over me with undisguised contempt, taking in my simple dress and the way I hold Alexander protectively against my chest. "Guardian," she repeats thoughtfully. How quaint. Though I have to wonder what qualifications a wolf-less Omega possesses to care for the royal heir. The insult hits its mark, but before I can respond, she continues with false sweetness. "Perhaps it's time Alexander had a proper caretaker, someone with the appropriate bloodline and abilities to match his extraordinary nature." Her implication is clear as crystal, and the watching pack members nod in agreement, their sense shifting to include anticipation for what they clearly expect to be my public humiliation. Mason's scent shifts to include dangerous undertones that make several nearby pack members take involuntary steps backward. "Alexander's care is not up for discussion," he says with quiet authority that carries the weight of absolute command. "Brittany has proven herself more than capable." Vivian's smile doesn't waver, but I catch the flash of calculation in her eyes as she realizes Mason won't simply dismiss me at her suggestion. "Of course, Alpha King. I simply meant that if you're serious about this arrangement, perhaps your companion should prove she's worthy of the honor." The challenge hangs in the air between us, and I realize with growing dread that this isn't a casual conversation but a carefully orchestrated public confrontation designed to expose my weaknesses before the entire pack. "What kind of proof?" I ask quietly, though part of me already knows I'm walking into a trap that's been months in the making. Vivian's smile widens with predatory satisfaction as she senses victory within her grasp. "Oh, nothing too demanding for someone who claims such devotion to the royal line. Just a simple demonstration that you can protect what you claim to guard." She gestures toward the center of the hall where the other pack members have begun to form a loose circle. A traditional challenge between females. First blood wins. My stomach drops because I've heard of such challenges, brutal contests that rely on shifted wolf forms and supernatural strength I simply don't possess, designed to establish hierarchy through raw physical dominance. "She doesn't have to prove anything to you," Mason growls, rising from his chair with lethal grace that makes the very air around him shimmer with barely contained power. "Stand down, Vivian." But Vivian's eyes never leave my face, reading the fear I'm trying desperately to hide behind a mask of false confidence. "She's welcome to decline, of course," she says with mock understanding that fools no one present. Though I suppose that would answer certain questions about her suitability for such an important position. The room has gone completely silent now, every pack member watching to see how this will play out, and I realize that refusing the challenge will only confirm their worst opinions about my weakness and unworthiness to stand beside their alpha king. Alexander whimpers in my arms as if sensing the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm, and suddenly I understand that this isn't just about me anymore, it's about whether I'm strong enough to protect him when real threats arise. "I accept," I say clearly, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice echoing through the hushed hall. Mason's head snaps toward me with shock and what might be admiration burning in his silver eyes, while Vivian's expression shows the first hint of genuine surprise she's displayed all evening. "Brittany," Mason starts, but I shake my head firmly. "She's right," I say, meeting his silver gaze with determination I didn't know I possessed until this very moment. "If I'm going to be Alexander's guardian, I need to prove I can defend him against any threat." I hand Alexander to Kane, who accepts him with gentle competence and protective positioning, then turn back to Vivian with my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. "Where do we do this?" The alarm bell's sharp clang pierces through the morning mist like a blade, jolting me from the restless sleep that's become my constant companion since the challenge with Vivian 3 days ago. My body still aches from that brutal confrontation, purple bruises painting my ribs and arms in testimony to her vicious claws, but the satisfaction of drawing first blood burns brighter than any physical pain. Alexander stirs in his crib at the sound, his silver eyes immediately finding mine with that uncanny awareness that never fails to unsettle me, and I gather him close as heavy footsteps echo through the corridors outside our chambers. "What is it?" I whisper to Kane as he appears in our doorway, his usually composed features tight with concern and something that might be confusion. "A messenger from Thornbrook," he says carefully, his eyes meeting mine with an expression I can't quite read. "Young Wolf claims to have urgent news from Helen about Vincent's movements in the valley." My blood turns cold because any news from the village where we found sanctuary carries the weight of both hope and dread, especially since we had to flee so abruptly after Connor's attack. "Is Helen safe?" I ask immediately, my heart clenching with worry for the kind woman who risked everything to shelter us. "The messenger says she's alive," Kane replies, but something in his tone suggests there's more to the story than simple good news. "Mason wants you in the council chamber immediately." Alexander whimpers against my chest as if sensing my distress, his tiny hand fisting in the fabric of my nightgown while my mind races with possibilities, most of them ending in tragedy for the people who showed us kindness. I dress quickly in the simple but elegant gown Mason insists befits my position as Alexander's guardian, noting how the rich blue fabric brings out the amber in my eyes and gives me a confidence I never possessed in my previous life. Alexander settles comfortably in my arms as we make our way through corridors that have become familiar over the past month, past tapestries and artifacts that speak of power and permanence in ways my old pack never achieved. The council chamber doors are carved with intricate wolves beneath lunar phases, and I pause for a moment to gather my courage before Kane pushes them open to reveal the scene within. A young wolf stands near the massive fireplace, his clothes torn and stained with travel, dark hair hanging in his eyes as he shifts nervously from foot to foot like someone unaccustomed to being in the presence of royalty. Mason sits behind the great oak table that dominates the room, his silver eyes immediately finding mine across the space with an intensity that steadies my racing pulse, and I realize he's been waiting for my arrival before proceeding with whatever news this messenger brings. "This is Thomas," Mason says as I approach, his voice carrying undertones of caution that immediately put me on edge. He says he's from Thornbrook Village, with news from Helen. Thomas looks up as I enter, his brown eyes widening slightly as they take in my appearance, and I notice how his gaze lingers on Alexander with an expression I can't quite identify, but that makes my protective instincts sharpen. "Lady Brittany," he says with a bow that seems awkward and unpracticed, as if he's not entirely sure of the proper protocol. "Helen sent me to warn you about Vincent's forces." The mention of Vincent's name makes my stomach clench with dread, but something about the way Thomas says it feels off, as if he's reciting words he's memorized rather than delivering news that truly frightens him. "What kind of warning?" I ask, settling into the chair beside Mason while keeping my attention focused on the messenger's face for any tells that might betray deception. "Vincent's been moving through the mountain villages systematically," Thomas says, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting threats to emerge from the shadows. "Forcing the elders to reveal information about anyone who might have sheltered strangers, anyone who might know about the lost prince." His words carry the ring of truth, but Alexander begins to fuss in my arms the moment Thomas's attention focuses on him, his tiny face scrunching with distress in a way that makes every protective instinct I possess flare to life. "How did you escape?" Mason asks, his alpha authority filling the room like a physical presence as he studies the young wolf with predatory intensity. "If Vincent's forces are as thorough as you suggest, it seems unlikely they'd let a messenger slip away." Thomas's scent shifts slightly, carrying undertones of something that might be fear or guilt, and he takes a step closer to the fireplace as if seeking warmth. "I was out hunting when they arrived," he says quickly, perhaps too quickly. "By the time I returned, they'd already questioned everyone and moved on." The explanation is reasonable enough, but something about his posture bothers me, the way he keeps glancing toward the windows as if tracking the sun's position or expecting someone to appear. "Helen specifically asked you to come here?" I press, because the Helen I knew was cautious about revealing our location to anyone, even those she trusted. "She said to tell you that the silver light remembers its guardian," Thomas replies, and my breath catches because those words carry the weight of prophecy, the kind of message Helen would send to prove the messenger's authenticity. But Alexander's distress is increasing, his tiny whimpers growing into genuine cries that echo off the stone walls, and suddenly I notice something that makes my blood run cold. "You smell wrong," I say quietly, my voice cutting through Alexander's crying like a blade. "There's honeysuckle in your scent, faint but unmistakable." Thomas's eyes widen with what might be panic, and suddenly his nervous shifting takes on a different meaning as I remember Connor's attack on the village, the way Vincent's hunters had marked their territory with that distinctive floral scent. "I don't know what you mean," Thomas says, but his voice has lost its uncertain quality, becoming sharper and more focused in a way that confirms my growing suspicions. Mason rises from his chair with lethal grace, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon at his belt as he positions himself between Thomas and us. "How long have you been working for Vincent?" he asks with dangerous quiet, his alpha dominance pressing against the room like a living thing. "They're here," Mason says grimly, already moving toward his weapons with the fluid grace of a predator preparing for battle. "Vincent couldn't wait for a more strategic assault. He's gambling everything on overwhelming us before we can fully prepare our defenses." Through the window, I can see fires blooming like deadly flowers across the outer walls where Vincent's forces have begun their siege, and the acrid smell of smoke mingles with the metallic scent of blood already being spilled in the courtyards below. "How many?" I ask, gathering Alexander into my arms while my mind races through everything Mason has taught me about combat and survival during our training sessions. Too many, he admits, strapping on armor that bears the ancient symbols of his bloodline. But Vincent's made one crucial mistake. He's attacking at night when Alexander's power is strongest, when the lunar connection that flows through you both is at its peak. The fortress shudders under the impact of some massive magical assault, stone dust raining from the ceiling as Vincent's forces demonstrate capabilities we hadn't anticipated. "I need to get to the walls," Mason says, moving toward the door with lethal purpose. "Cain will escort you and Alexander to the inner sanctum where the protective wards are strongest." But even as he speaks, the sound of splintering wood echoes through the corridors, suggesting that Vincent's forces have already breached the outer defenses with shocking speed. "No," I say firmly, surprising myself with the authority in my voice. "We stay together." Mason turns back to me with silver eyes that burn with both admiration and concern. "Brittany, this isn't a training exercise, these are Vincent's elite forces, and they've come specifically for Alexander." Another explosion rocks the fortress, closer this time, and suddenly I understand with crystal clarity that separating now would be exactly what Vincent wants, to divide our strength when we need it most united. "Then we give him a fight he wasn't expecting," I say, settling Alexander in the reinforced carrier that Mason designed specifically for combat situations. "The prophecies say the Triad's power is strongest when we're together." The bond between us flares to life with unprecedented intensity as Mason recognizes the truth in my words, our souls reaching for each other across the space that separates us with desperate need for connection. "Together," he agrees, moving to my side with movements that seem to flow in perfect synchronization with my own. The moment his hand touches mine, power explodes between us like lightning seeking ground, silver light erupting from our joined hands to fill the chamber with energy that makes the very air sing with possibility. Alexander stops crying immediately, his silver eyes widening with wonder as he senses the magnificent force building around his parents. The door to our chambers explodes inward just as our power reaches its peak, Vincent's elite guards pouring through the opening with weapons drawn and murder in their eyes. But instead of the helpless targets they expected to find, they face something unprecedented in the history of our kind, a perfectly synchronized mating pair whose combined abilities transcend anything recorded in the ancient texts. Mason moves like liquid death beside me, his sword cutting through enemy ranks with supernatural speed while I channel power through our bond that amplifies his strength beyond normal limits. Every strike he makes sends silver fire coursing through his blade, turning mundane steel into a weapon capable of cutting through magical armor as if it were parchment. "Impossible," one of the guards gasps as Mason's enhanced abilities allow him to take down 3 opponents simultaneously. "No wolf should be that fast." But they haven't seen anything yet because as more enemies pour into the chamber, I discover that our bond allows me to anticipate their movements through Mason's enhanced senses while feeding him tactical information through our shared consciousness. We move as one entity with 2 bodies, each covering the other's weaknesses while amplifying our individual strengths into something that defies every law of supernatural combat. The enemies fall before us like wheat before a scythe, their confidence crumbling as they realize they're not facing 2 separate opponents but a unified force whose power grows stronger with each moment of contact. "The child," one surviving guard shouts desperately. "Get the child and retreat." But Alexander has become the focal point of our shared power rather than a vulnerability, his healing abilities flowing through our bond to sustain us through injuries that should have been crippling. When a crossbow bolt takes Mason in the shoulder, Alexander's power heals the wound before it can slow him down, the silver light that surrounds us intensifying with each act of magical healing. This is what Vincent feared, I realize aloud as we stand victorious over the fallen elite guards. Not just our individual abilities, but what we become when those abilities merge. Mason pulls me against his side with his uninjured arm, and I feel the bond between us solidifying into something permanent and unbreakable, forged in the crucible of shared combat rather than formal ritual. The mating bond, he says with wonder, his wolf spirit flowing into mine until I can no longer tell where his consciousness ends and mine begins. It's complete. Through the shattered doorway, we can hear Vincent's forces regrouping for another assault, but for the first time since this began, their approach sounds uncertain rather than confident. Let them come, I say, feeling Alexander's contented cooing as he settles peacefully in his carrier despite the carnage around us. We're ready for whatever Vincent can throw at us. The triad is complete not through ancient ceremony but through the ultimate test of shared purpose, and I can feel our combined power rippling outward through the fortress like a declaration of war that will reshape the very foundations of our world.
The first scream tears through the morning air like broken glass, high and desperate, and unmistakably Brittany's voice echoing from somewhere deep within the fortress walls. I drop the battle reports I'd been reviewing and race toward the sound. Brittany, I roar, following the sound through corridors that seem to stretch endlessly before me. But when I reach what should be the source of her distress, I find only empty stone and shadows that dance with malicious intent. Another scream, this time from the opposite direction, sends me spinning back through hallways I know as well as my own heartbeat. But again I find nothing except the lingering echo of her terror. She's in the dungeons, Kane pants, appearing at my elbow with sweat beading his forehead. I heard her calling for help from the lower levels. But even as he speaks, Brittany's voice rises from the tower above us, pleading desperately for someone to find her before it's too late. That's impossible, I snarl, my wolf surging forward with confusion and rage as the sounds of my mate's suffering seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She can't be in multiple places simultaneously. Through the fortress, I can hear my warriors responding to the various calls, some racing toward the dungeons, while others head for the towers, all of us chasing phantom cries that lead nowhere but deeper into Vincent's elaborate trap. The psychological warfare is masterful in its cruelty, designed to exploit every protective instinct I possess, while keeping me too scattered to think clearly. Mason, please. Brittany's voice whispers from directly behind me, and I spin to find her standing in the corridor, her amber eyes wide with terror as she clutches at invisible restraints. He has Alexander. He's going to hurt our son if you don't bring me to the eastern watchtower. But even as I step toward her, another version of her voice calls from the opposite end of the hallway. Don't listen to her, Mason. I'm the real one. Vincent is using magic to confuse you. I freeze between the two voices, my enhanced senses detecting Brittany's scent from both directions, her heartbeat echoing in stereo through corridors that shouldn't be able to contain such impossibilities. Each illusion is so perfectly crafted that even my supernatural abilities can't distinguish them from reality, and I realize with growing horror that Vincent has studied our bond extensively to create such flawless replications. This is exactly what he wants, I realize aloud, watching as both versions of Brittany reach toward me with desperate hands, to paralyze me with choices while the real Brittany dies somewhere I can't find her. The illusions flicker slightly at my words, their perfect facades showing hairline cracks that reveal the magical constructs beneath, but their voices remain hauntingly accurate replications of my mate's desperation. You have 15 minutes. Both Brittanists say in perfect unison, their words overlapping in a harmony that makes my skin crawl. Bring Alexander to where I'm being held, or watch me die slowly. Through our bond, I feel a flutter of genuine emotion, not from these magical phantoms, but from somewhere deeper in the fortress, a thread of connection so faint I almost miss it beneath the chaos of false signals. The real bond carries undertones of claustrophobia and growing desperation that the illusions can't replicate, no matter how sophisticated Vincent's magic might be. The real Brittany is here. I breathe, following that gossamer thread through passages that seem to shift and change around me as Vincent's magic works to disorient my senses. She's close. More illusions spring up as I navigate the labyrinthine fortress, each one perfectly crafted to exploit my deepest fears. Brittany hanging from chains in the torture chambers. Brittany locked in a cage slowly filling with water. Brittany bleeding from wounds that spell out Vincent's demands in crimson across her skin. Some show her protecting Alexander from imaginary threats. Others depict her begging for mercy that will never come, all designed to shatter my focus and force me into making desperate choices. Choose quickly. They chorus as I pass, their voices weaving together into a symphony of psychological warfare designed to break my resolve. Alexander for Brittany, your son for your mate. Decide before time runs out. But I'm no longer listening to their lies, because the bond thread grows stronger with each step, leading me toward the abandoned wine cellar where few ever venture, past shelves of dusty bottles, toward a hidden alcove I'd forgotten existed. The air grows thicker as I descend, laden with magical residue that makes breathing feel like swallowing syrup, and suddenly I understand why my enhanced senses couldn't locate her before. Vincent has wrapped this entire section in spells designed to muffle supernatural abilities. Brittany, I call softly, and hear a muffled response from behind what appears to be solid stone, but feels wrong against my fingertips. Working frantically, I find the hidden mechanism that opens the concealed chamber, revealing my mate bound and gagged in a space barely large enough to contain her crouched form. Her amber eyes meet mine with relief, so profound it nearly drives me to my knees, and I can see the magical restraints around her are slowly constricting, designed to crush her if Vincent's deadline passes. I've got you, I promise, working to free her from bonds that burn my hands with every touch. You're safe now. As the last restraint falls away and Brittany collapses into my arms, breathing heavily but alive, the illusions throughout the fortress begin to wail in unison, a sound of defeat that tells me Vincent's elaborate psychological trap has finally crumbled. Alexander, she gasps against my throat, her voice hoarse from hours of captivity. Is he safe? He's safe, I assure her, holding her close enough to feel her heartbeat against my chest. Vincent underestimated what I'd do to find you. Through the fortress walls, I can hear the frustrated roars of Vincent's forces as their carefully orchestrated deception falls apart. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I'm not afraid of what comes next. Let them come, I murmur against Brittany's hair, feeling our bond snap back into place with overwhelming intensity. We're stronger together than apart.
The final assault begins with the earth itself trembling beneath Vincent's rage, but as he strides through the breach in our fortress walls, I realize with growing horror that something far worse than jealousy drives him now. His eyes burn with crimson fire instead of their natural silver, and shadows writhe around his form like living things hungry for destruction. Alexander begins to cry in my arms, not with infant distress but with genuine fear as he senses the ancient malevolence that has wrapped itself around his uncle's soul. "Hello, brother," Vincent calls across the rubble-strewn chamber, but his voice carries harmonics that belong to no wolf, echoing with the weight of centuries and the bitter cold of things that should have stayed buried. "I've come to reclaim what was stolen from me so long ago." Mason steps protectively in front of us, his silver eyes widening with recognition and horror. "That's not Vincent," he breathes, his wolf recognizing something primal and wrong about the creature wearing his brother's face. "Vincent died months ago, this is something else entirely." The thing that wears Vincent's form laughs, the sound like breaking bones and dying stars. Your brother was such a convenient vessel, it purrs with satisfaction. All that hatred and jealousy, all that pain from watching you receive everything he believed should be his, it made him so very easy to corrupt. Through our bond, I feel Mason's anguish as he realizes his brother has been gone longer than we knew, that every recent attack, every escalation in violence, has been orchestrated by this ancient evil wearing familiar features. The Devourer, I whisper, remembering fragments of old stories Helen used to tell about entities that fed on supernatural discord. It's one of the Devourers that the first healing kings banished. Alexander's cries intensify as the creature's attention fixes on him, and suddenly I understand why it wants our son so desperately, not for his healing power, but because consuming a healing king would give it the strength to break free from whatever prison has contained it for millennia. Clever little moon vessel, the Devourer hisses, taking a step closer. Yes, I am what your kind once feared most, corruption given form, the darkness that feeds on the spaces between what you call civilization. As it speaks, I can see Vincent fighting beneath the surface, his true consciousness struggling against the possession like a drowning man reaching for air. He's still in there, I realize aloud, hope flaring through our bond as Mason catches the same glimpse of his brother's trapped soul. Vincent is still fighting it. The Devourer's stolen features twist with irritation. Impossible. I consumed his will months ago, fed on his resentment until nothing remained but hunger for what he could never have. But Alexander's power begins to build around us like gathering starlight, and suddenly I can see everything, the tendrils of corruption wrapped around Vincent's spirit, the way the Devourer has been feeding on supernatural conflicts across multiple territories, the growing weakness in its hold as Alexander's pure light burns away the shadows it hides within. Your emptiness, Mason says suddenly, understanding flooding through our bond. That's why the prophecies called you a vessel, you can contain things that would destroy anyone else. The knowledge settles into my bones with terrible certainty because I realize what needs to happen, what my true purpose has always been. I can hold it, I whisper, feeling the vast hollow space within me that has always felt like failure suddenly revealing itself as preparation. I can contain the Devourer long enough for Alexander to purify it completely. Mason's hand finds mine, our bond flaring with desperate love and absolute trust. Together, he says simply, and I know he means to anchor me through the connection while I become a temporary prison for ancient evil. The Devourer senses our plan and roars with fury that shakes the very foundations of the fortress, but it's too late because Alexander's power has reached critical mass, silver light pouring from his tiny form in waves that make the creature wearing Vincent's face recoil with genuine pain. Now, I breathe, opening myself completely to the darkness that has poisoned Vincent's soul. The corruption pours into me like acid, filling every corner of my being with hatred and hunger and despair so profound it threatens to tear my sanity apart. But Mason's love flows through our bond like a lifeline while Alexander's healing light burns away the evil I'm containing. For a moment that feels like eternity, I am the battleground where ancient darkness meets divine light, my empty vessel nature allowing the forces to clash within me without destroying the world around us. Then Alexander's power finally overwhelms the corruption completely, dissolving it into silver fire that purifies rather than consumes, and suddenly Vincent collapses to the floor, unconscious but breathing, his natural silver eyes visible once more. Is it over? Mason asks, gathering both Alexander and me into his arms as exhaustion from channeling such power threatens to drag me into unconsciousness. Through the shattered windows, I can feel the ripple effects of Alexander's purification spreading across the territories like a cleansing wave, burning away pockets of corruption that have festered in hidden places for generations. It's over, I confirm, watching as Vincent's breathing steadies and the crimson shadows that have haunted him finally dissipate. The devourer is gone, and Vincent is free. Alexander settles peacefully in my arms, his silver eyes bright with satisfaction as if saving souls is the most natural thing in the world. Our son, Mason murmurs against my hair. Our miracle who doesn't just heal bodies, but spirits themselves. Around us, the fortress begins to rebuild itself through residual healing magic, stones flowing back into place as if the battle never happened, but I know the real victory isn't in restored walls but in a broken family finally made whole. Thanks for sticking with me till the end. Like, subscribe, and let me know, how do you like my new visuals? See you in the next chapter, my beloved listeners.